Okay, so thank you very much and good afternoon everyone. It's really a great honor for me to be here. I have to admit that it reminds me of old memories. If I remember well, maybe Hossein will tell me, I mean in 1999 we had, or 98 we had a workshop on cold molecules which gave rise to this book called Molecules in 99 if I'm correct. And I think it was here.
It was also January, it was also ultra cold.
Yeah. And anyway, so in that sense, a lot of memories came back to me. And so I definitely thank Michael and Thomas for this invitation and this opportunity to present you some of that work that I already, have to admit, presented once, but hopefully I have time to tell you something, another story, so depending on the time. So depending on our chairman, I would say. So this is the title, and actually the title refers to the first part of the talk, and which is definitely trying to fit into the title of the workshop, which is this many-body effect, which is called ions. And so we go back to molecules, but for those of you who know me, you will not be surprised by that. And definitely a molecule is a many-body problem, whatever you do, because you have electrons and then nuclei and everything, so that makes really something like 50, 60, 100 body problem. So definitely, of course, it depends what you call many-body and in which sense, of course, you use it. And then I also kind of put this in pretty, but I was trying to find another name actually, but I thought that atom with an attitude was too long. So we should find something else, right? Anyway, so this is the way it is. So this is the team that we are in Orsay. So these are my colleagues. It's an old picture. I should have replaced it. It's not anymore valid. I'm looking much older than that. And then this is the permanent people here, and we have these 2 PhD students, postdocs. As usual, in France, this kind of the reverse way compared to many countries in the world. That is, we are more permanent people than young people. But anyway, it's a nice atmosphere to collaborate, and the work that I will talk today about has been mainly performed by Humberto da Silva, who just left us, who is now, by the way, in Las Vegas, and also Maurice Raoult. And this is the funding here, and one of it has been very important for us, which is this European network, and which was coordinated by Michael Brussen. And also this work that I'm going to present actually is part of several collaborations that are listed here, for instance with Tobias and also with Roy here. So just in brief, this is the kind of thing that we do in my group. So what I'm going to talk today is definitely something to do with the formation of cold molecules, in this particular case cold molecular ions, and the dynamics of their formation, that is both structure calculations and assisted by light. Structure calculation, formation processes assisted by light, and also these dynamics in this kind of environment. But we also do structure for other systems, the dynamics of cold molecule in external field, looking at a long-range interaction between atoms, molecules, and also involving light, and also things which are related dynamics in low-energy processes in the interstellar medium. And in terms of motivations, you already had many talks about cold molecular ions, and so I like simply to put this kind of motivation, which is what actually the kind of the motto of this cold molecular ion network, and you find again all those keywords that we have found and that have illustrated several talks during this workshop. The same for this work package, which is basically what we have heard about to now. And we are hoping that there will be another similar initiative in the near future, a funded initiative, because there is an initiative, but it is not funded for the moment. Hopefully it will be in the near future. The context of this study is this one that you of course all know, which is typically here I just illustrated what's going on in the Stefan Village group, which is basically having an ion trap and a cold atom trap superimposed together. This is the kind of image that you can get with some iron crystal, a cloud of rubidium atoms, and depending on what you want to do, you can look at the decay of the crystal And then you can guess something about the dynamics that you have when you have those two systems interacting. And so typically you look at the decreasing of the number of ions, and then you can get some kind of rate constants here, and that some kind of average collision energy. And in this particular case, using the property of the iron crystal, some kind of mass spectrometry was doable, and that was actually the first observation of the effective formation of molecular ions in such an environment, like in this case calcium rubidium plus and rubidium 2+. And actually, there are not too many experiments which were able indeed to observe the formation of those molecular ions in this kind of environment. And this is actually the whole story of this kind of experiment, which is that besides the atoms and the ions, there is also a lot of light. And then in that sense, it's also a many-body problem in the sense that you have photon, ion, and atoms. So, and we'll try to see how we can sort out some of those things here. So this is, of course, even if from the point of the cold molecular ions, they are not observed in many experiments. Still, there is a lot of, hopefully I have not forgotten anyone. If I have, I would be pleased to know which one I forgot, of course. But these are all the kind of combinations that can be done. And what is interesting in this kind of, actually I think I forgot because there are at least two other groups who are doing the lithium Barium Plus. The kind of thing which is nice with this is that, of course, the various combinations, you can explore various physical properties, and it's kind of, for a theorist, it's just like tuning a button, you change the species, so it's much easier for us than for experimentalists, of course. But this is nice because then the various properties could be enhanced depending on the combination, and so that provides a lot of opportunities to test models and to fully explain what's going on. The thing is that even if it is like looking like, let's say, diatomic systems, they look like simple, but actually when you do the experiments, you all know, of course, that this is really complex, and in particular because the dynamics taking place there is very, very complex. And so let's try to see what we can say from the point of view of the theory. And for that, I will concentrate on one example, which is through the collaboration that we have with Johannes Telschlag at Ulm. And so he's considering that combination of barium plus and rubidium. And actually, due to the fact that it has a high density of rubidium atoms, what's dominant at the end is a three-body combination. That is the fact that the collision of the barium plus ion with rubidium atom is actually always perturbed by another rubidium atom. I think this is the way that I like to think about this three-body combination, which is that you have basically the long-range interaction between barium plus and the rubidium, which dominates over the rubidium-rubidium interaction, which means that you can always think, in my vision, a simple way, which is that you have this barium plus, a rubidium atom is coming, and while they are getting close together, you have another one, rubidium, which is cruising not too far, which is perturbing actually this collision. What I mean is that the probability to have really the three atoms really at the same place and undergoing a very destructive collision is probably quite poor. And so I like this idea of saying it like, most of the case you will have such a collision perturbed by another atom, and see if this model could work or not. So what's going on there when you have this system? So the idea is that you will have then this three-body recombination, that is formation of molecular ion and some rubidium which is left behind. And so this is what I was telling you. Actually, the experiment actually is compatible with the fact that the created molecular ion has actually very small binding energy. And this is what I was telling you, that they are just colliding, and this rubidium atom, the sub-body, is just kind of making a really small kick so that they stabilize with a binding energy which is compatible or comparable to the energy of, let's say, the relative energy of the rubidium and the barium plus. So in some sense there is no violence in this process. But then once you have that, it is definitely not finished, because then the molecular ion is still exposed to rubidium atoms because the density is large. And so it means that you may have, in this case, because you may have a strong attraction here, then you may have the possibility to create helium 2 plus ions, and then leaving behind the barium atom. And also the possibility of having this helium barium plus ion colliding with helium here and doing some kind of an inelastic collision. And so those things are, of course, occurring together, so with some rate. But not only that, I mean, while those guys are colliding, they are also exposed to the photons which are inherent to the experiment. And so at the end, you measure something. Basically, what you measure is the barium plus ion, which is, in that particular experiment, you measure an excited barium plus ion which is hot. And so the question is that, okay, you have this barium plus ion which is hot. How can you tell something about the rest? You see, because it's definitely not a spectroscopic measurement. It is like you detect an ion and so on. So let's say if by the model we can kind of guide what's going on. Of course, everything starts with this, which is my favorite picture, as you can imagine, which is like computing many potential energy curves. And so when you see that, of course, all this methodology, which is written here, which is that you start by modeling the course, the ionic course, in such a way that you reduce the system, that is the barium plus and rubidium atom, you reduce it to a 2-electron system, to a 2-electron molecule. That makes life much simpler. And so once you have done that, it's easy to do some kind of standard quantum chemistry calculation, which allows you, because you have only 2 electrons, to do what is called the full configuration interaction. What it means that you have the possibility to get all kinds of excited states, electronically excited states, very high energy, with, I would say, a decent precision. What is a decent precision? This we will see. But you immediately see that the question which would arise if indeed we have, this is the entrance channel here, for instance, helium 5s, barium plus 6s. And the question is that if we start to play with all those numbers, what can we say about the accuracy of that? To which extent we can trust the prediction and see, of course, if those calculations, which are by far not precise at the spectroscopic level, so to which extent they are useful to explain something. All right, so let's go a bit step by step into the system. So as I said, so this is the reaction that we are looking at. And so this is then the entrance channel. That is, initially you have this rubidium, barium plus colliding, and they are kind of, as I said, hindered by or modified by an extra rubidium atom, and you create this molecular ion in a weakly bound level. And so this is this dotted line here. So assume that this is indeed your weakly bound level, which is here. And so, so this is, I would say, our starting point. So what can happen here? So the first thing that can happen is this, that is spontaneous emission. Because you see, this is not the ground state of the system. You have a heteronuclear system, and of course you have a transition dipole moment that you can go from here to there. This is so-called singlet sigma states. The ground state, the absolute ground state has the same symmetry, and so you can indeed have some kind of spontaneous emission. And so in this case, either you go back with 2 free particles, or you can create eventually molecular ion here. So this is the relative lifetime of such highly excited state, highly excited level here. And so this is the binding energy, this is the lifetime here, and you see we really talk about really long lifetime here. So they survive quite long. You see here, this is, we are talking about milliseconds here, typically. So it is definitely a slow process, this one. So then it suggests that maybe something else will happen to these molecular ions before doing this kind of spontaneous emission. Then, so the other thing that you have in such an experiment is this arrow here, which is the 1064 laser, which is made for the dipole trap for the rubidium atom, which is always there. And so it means that, you see, if you create this weakly bound level, then immediately you will absorb the photon and will go somewhere here. Okay, and then immediately we see what's going on. It is that if indeed you absorb such a photon, then suddenly you have this big energy here which is available, and then here you have the baryon plus 5D, and so typically we immediately see that what will be seen is, there's a chance to see indeed those excited ion. This is the metastable of the metastable state of the ion, and with a significant amount of energy here. Okay, so this is what. So how can we do that? So of course, when we want to do those calculations, this is quite standard calculation. You want to calculate some cross section for this photo dissociation study, and so you start from this initial wave function, which is this one here. So some molecular symmetry, vibrational level. Then what you have is you have to compute some continuum wave function here for corresponding to one of those potential. And so with some energy, and also some molecular symmetry here, and then you have the transition dipole moment, which is an electronic property, which is describing the property of the electronic wave function. And so in this particular case, for the states which are involved, you see the one here is the lowest state for the triplet symmetry. Here this is because you have this one, which is a singlet. And you have the possibility to also have this one. They are both connected to the entrance channel. And so, of course, when you do collision, they could be both populated. And so you can look at the transition from one of those states to the others. And so these are this kind of function. They depend on the internuclear distance. And so the first thing that we see first is the fact that they all go to zero here because at a large distance, all those asymptotes, they are not they are kind of forbidden transition from here. You see, because you have either rubidium 5s or rubidium plus, so the dipole moment will be basically zero. Okay? And so this is this kind of thing that you have to integrate then to get this cross section. And so due to the fact that, so it's just the same dipole moment function here to two particular states, which is these two guys here, which are dissociated to the 5D asymptote. And then you see from the very beginning, you can say that, of course, there is nothing related to long range, so everything happens at short range, otherwise you have just no transition which is possible. So you have to look at what's going on at the inner turning point, that is on that side, yeah. And then, so it's kind of pedagogic, but it's just to try to see if what we say is relevant or not. So these are the wave functions which are associated to the in these two symmetries. So the vibrational wave function here. So this one is for you see these are the same, right? And this is for one of the level. In this particular case, the binding energy is 10 wave number. Yeah. Okay. So this is the vibrational wave function that we have. Then we have the continuum wave function, which looks like that. You see. So depending on the states here. And so you have to make the product of those three things, you remember, and then to integrate. So if you just do the product as an R-dependent quantity, so what you look at is that you will see if you will have some kind of constructive interference between these two wave functions or not. And you look at this thing will basically be built at short distances. And so when you do that, this is the kind of integrant, this is just the integrant that you get, or the overlap if you prefer, between these two functions. So you see that there are kick here, the main contribution here. Normally it is somewhere here. But when you integrate now these functions, so this red line is the cumulative integral. Okay, as you extend the upper bound of the integral, and you see that indeed this integral for that particular state is built at short distance, and then it is stabilized. So you have some probability. While in the other case, basically, this is a complete destructive interference, and then you have nothing. So from that kind of analysis, you can already say if you have some kind of selectivity of the possible channels here, and then say something about, okay, that will be more than channel than the others, and so. So this is the kind of analysis that you can get. And so why should we trust in this kind of picture? And you see, I don't refer specifically. Of course, I say that I'm using this 1064 laser, but the idea is really to look at how those wave functions interfere. And so the question is more that if we believe everything depends more of the relative position between the potential than on this energy here. And for sure, this kind of calculations, this energy, we don't know. I mean, the spacing between the potential curves is something which has some inaccuracy, which is hard to estimate, but it is basically hundreds of wave number, like 1/200 wave number. So it's not very satisfactory. But the position, the relative position of the potentials in R, that is the shape, the general shape of the potential, is reputed to be quite good in this kind of calculation. And so in that sense, you can always predict or expect with a reasonable trust, I would say, that confidence that this relative position is meaningful indeed. And so what you describe here is something which is relevant. But of course, it doesn't mean that it happens at 1064 here precisely. Okay, this particular result could happen at a slightly different energy in the real system. This is what I'm saying. All right. And so this is what I was saying, that the products are those here, because if indeed you go to this photodissociation, then you have this hot barium ion. And the point is that, so in the experiments, they managed to extract from the observation the cross-section which is at about that order of magnitude. And so the question is that when you put all those things together, do you get this kind of cross-section as well? So this is what I was telling you about the energy. So this is now the cross-section here as a function of transition energy. So this is the 1064 in this particular case. And so we have computed the cross-sections as a function of the energy. And it is just to tell you that, as I said, as we don't know exactly the spacing between those potential curves, it is just like if we would consider an energy which is not exactly 1064, but some kind of, uncertainty of the energy. From the point of view of the model, this is what happens. And so when you compute those cross-sections as a function of energy, at least you see what are the extreme values of this cross-section. They could be at most as big like this, and you see, and depending, so you have some kind of, I would say, overall magnitude, depending on the channel. So you see this one is definitely extremely small. Okay, this one a bit less small, like 10 to the minus 20 here. Here 10 to the minus 18, and same for here. But of course, because those cross-sections they result from the interference of two oscillating wave functions, then those cross-sections they oscillate with energy as well. And so the question is that where nature is, okay, it is not from the point of the model, it is not necessarily here, and so you have some kind of estimate of what is the kind of boundaries that you can provide to your cross-section indeed to explain the experiment. And so as in the experiment they are claiming that they have something like 10 to the minus 18 square centimeter for the cross-section, it means that definitely that should be associated to that state and that state. And you could disregard all the others because they are too small to explain the results. Okay? So in that sense, of course, you could be unlucky and be, you could have potential curves which are split in such a way that the cross-section will be zero here, but it's most likely not the case just because they observe those hot ions. So that means that the process has some efficiency. And so this is the kind of thing that we can say. You cannot probe, you cannot tell an exact number for the cross-section. You can just say, look, at least you can select what is the main channel, this is one, and second you can give some kind of order of magnitude which is reasonable to explain the experiment. So this is the purpose, and this is the kind of degree of confidence that you could give to those kind of models. And so here this is just several results for various, depending on the binding energy that you have here. So this is how the cross-section varies. And why are we looking at various binding energy here? This is just because what I was telling you. On the first step, you create a weakly bound level, and then due to successive collision, it may populate other bonds, and they are still exposed to the photons. Then you go on and photodissociate them, even if they are quenched in other vibration levels. Here, this is just to say that when you transfer this cross-section, as you see, this is the binding energy, so this is for various levels. So you put this energy here on the vertical scale, and this is a cross-section, so it's kind of inverted scale. It is just to demonstrate that
those cross-sections are kind of linear, at least for the weakly bound state, they're kind of linear with the binding energy. So that helps when you want to put all those data in a kinetic model. That is what they do to model the experiment. Because of course you have to, as I said, to put all the process, photodissociation, the quenching, and so on and so forth. And so in that sense, it is useful to kind of parameterize this cross-section with this function. All right, so at the end, so it's kind of not completely finished story because the paper is still under progress. But typically, the main statements are those, which is that if you happen to create molecular ion in this kind of experiments, their lifetime is definitely limited by the presence of the laser light. So in any case, you will not kind of, at least as long as in this kind of setup, you will not accumulate molecular ion in a trap because they will be always perturbed by light. And it is a kind of a general statement, and that makes, at least as long as you want to claim for cold chemistry in this kind of environment, it is not so easy because definitely you cannot keep the molecular ions for a long time. And so here in this particular experiment, I mean, it is kind of a first direct observation that those molecular ions could be formed indeed with three-body collisions. And so this is the result of the theory, which is that we can at least select some channels, and we are able to identify those efficient channels, and kind of provide numbers to be integrated in some model, including some kind of dynamical kinetic model, including all the processes, and so all the models says that everything is consistent with the fact that you have photodissociation, you have this vibrational quenching, and so when you sum all this process, you get a cross section which is, I would say, you get a formation rate for these hot ions, which is compatible with what is observed in the experiments. So in that sense, it's a complicated model to explain the presence of hot barium plus excited ions, okay, which are the result of many competing processes. And also, it's something that I've not said, but it seems that from the model that if you, I told you that in the ancient channel you had a singlet and a triplet channel, it seems that it is quite selective. And so for the moment, in the experiment they have detected only barium plus ions. For some reason, they have not seen erbium plus ions. They have not detected them. But it seems that the triplet channel would preferably produce those ones. So in some kind of selectivity in the products that are possible. Okay, so I think yes. Next step it is to make the model a little bit more complicated. Here, this is one of the results that I've shown to you, but actually this state, this excited state, is coupled by spin orbit to neighboring triplet state, triplet pi state. And so in principle, you have to look at the influence of the spin orbit interaction, because then you don't have any more a pure sigma state, but you have some kind of mixture, and then you have to see how much the cross-section changed when you include these kind of features. I would say that at the level of the precision for the moment of the experiment, I'm not sure that that could be detected, this kind of difference, but at least from the point of the model, there are some modifications, but which are kind of do not modify the conclusion of the model, I would say. Okay, how much time do I have still? 7. Okay, good. So the other thing that I'd like to tell you is just something which is in progress, and I thought it would be interesting to tell you. It's a way that we designed recently to model a three-body recombination of different particles. And so the context of that is the formation of H3- in ion traps. So it is still ion traps, but it's now negative ions. We heard about negative ions yesterday. And it is in the framework of a collaboration with Roland Wester. So I will probably skip several slides, but maybe I want just to give you a few things. First of all, I don't know if you ever heard about this ion, H3-. Okay, at some point we thought that it could be seen in the interstellar medium, and it is definitely not the case. We thought that it could be, because it is created from H- and H2, and so we thought at some point that it could be some kind of a marker of the presence of H- in the interstellar medium, because H- has no resonant condition, and so we were looking at some possibility to have something which has some bound condition to trace the presence of H minus. And so it is not the case, but at the moment we tried to see it, that was the kind of idea that we had. Anyway, so the thing is that this ion is stable, as you will see in a minute, but actually this system, as you can imagine, has produced a lot of studies, like in particular collision studies, collision between H2 and H minus at various energy zones. But due to the fact that for some reason here, as you see, there is no cross-section anymore, so one possibility could be to look in ion traps at what's going on here, actually, in more details. And so there were basically no studies up to now. And something which is interesting, that the spectroscopy of that ion is just completely unknown. And the only thing that has been seen is that there have been those ions, as you can see, that have been detected in some kind of plasma discharge in some kind of mass spectrometry. But this is the only thing that we know. But from the theory, we know more than this. And it's actually, this system is actually some kind of van der Waals molecule. That is, you have H minus, which is bound to H2. It is not like a complex like this. It is really some kind of H2 and H minus, like some kind of super diatom, if you like. And so this is the way the potential energy surface is looking like. You have a well here, which is kind of all the same in the other direction, depending on the pairing of H minus to one of the other H atom. And so you have indeed one well here, one well here, and you have a barrier in between these two wells, which is at about half an eV here. While the potential well here is something like 400 wave numbers. And so when you do the calculation, briefly, so we have done ourselves the calculation of this surface. It is not the first one, but we try to improve the precision of this potential energy surface with some method that I will skip, but just to tell you that we made the calculation. By the way, it's interesting also to notice that there is a permanent dipole moment, I mean, in the body fixed frame for this system, because you have H minus and H2, so we have clearly some inhomogeneity in the charge distribution. And so this is the kind of thing that we have done, and this is the kind of calculation that you can do for specific geometry. So here it just compares the various tentatives. So you see 4 methods are really predicting with really good accuracy, I would say, the potential well of this particular system. So just to say that it exists, the point is that can you observe it, can you detect it, can you do some kind of spectroscopy on it, given the fact that you could call that the smallest triatomic negative ion, the order of the hydrogen family. And indeed, you have bound levels. When you solve that problem, you see where you have 1, 2, 3 bound levels here in this well, and there is another one which is lying in the same, coming from another state, from another symmetry. Okay, and so these are those levels that you have. And so you see, you can compute wave function and so on. So they exist and they are there. And so the question now is, if you so this here we tried, as I said, we tried to look if you could associate H minus and H2 by radiative association, and this is just telling you that it's a very low process, and you can see the rate constant is really small. And so the question is that can you form it by 3-body combination? And so typically what Roland Wester wants to see in his trap is able to trap H minus. He put H2 in the trap, and he wants to see if you have the possibility to observe this H2 minus. But from the point of the theory, having to deal with 2 H2 molecules is a bit tricky. And so what we say is that let's try to see if we can do something with H minus H2 helium, and to see if we can have some rate here. And so this is the reason why we were decided to look for this kind of model for the 3-body recombination of 3 different particles. And so typically what is done usually in this business, it is the methodology which has been developed by Chris Green and many collaborators for many years, which is that working in this what is called hyperspherical coordinates, which are these collective coordinates when you have some kind of coordinates which are simulating the 3 particles simultaneously. So what I mean is that you don't have anymore those particles that you can identify, but you have some kind of global thing. And this is a formality which is very efficient, especially when you have 3 identical atoms, not only, but it is particularly efficient. And but we thought that then this is the kind of cross-section that you would calculate in this case with some kind of S matrix coming from some collisional calculation. and then you can compute the rate. Here, the scattering matrix, you start from the 3-body continuum, and then you end with the 2-body continuum. And so what we thought is that it could be nice to see if you could describe this 3-body combination, but in Jacobi coordinates, especially if you have different particles, because it's more intuitive. So here you have H minus H2 with this small r, and this here, which is the perturber, which is kind of inducing, hopefully, this recombination. And so typically what we do, that can be understood from here. You see, you have those 3 processes. Here is the 3-body recombination. That is, you start from something which is colliding. Here, I will tell you about this V box here. So this A and B, that is this could collide with this one, and they create AB in some Wabachon level. But you have the reverse on that, which is the 3-body breakup, which is that you start from the bound level, and then you end in the continuum. This should be the index. I forgot to put it in the index. And then the other possibility that you have is to have this kind of Wabachon relaxation. And if you look at these 2 equations in parallel, you see that basically this version is the continuum version of this one. You see, it's just the same, except that this is a continuum state instead of being a bound state. And so what we do numerically is that we kind of discretize this continuum. So we put that continuum in a box, discretize, and we treat the discretized level here in the same footing that the Wabachon level which are here. Then you have a basis set on which you can develop a discrete basis set on which you can develop your scattering wave function, and then it is really helpful, instead of treating with a real continuum, you treat with discrete states, and then at the end you go back to the continuum. So this is exactly what we have done. This is what I said. We discretize the continuum in these coordinates, okay, and we call that box state. This is why you have this index V box, okay. And so, as I said, you pile up those discrete labels, which are this quasi-discrete level, with the Wabachon levels. You pile up them, and you develop your scattering cross-section on this basis. And so for that, you need to make some modeling. I will go short, I think. You have to do some modeling for the potential energy surface, so let's say that we don't care for the moment. But this is basically what the picture explaining this. So it means that here you see you have this H3 minus V equals 3 plus helium. H3 minus V equals 4 plus helium. Remember that are those labels of H3 minus that I was telling you. And of course, this is the distance between helium and H3 minus. But then when you're above, okay, you have now H2 H minus, H2 H minus in the continuum, but in some discretized level, which is this V box, this is the discretization of the continuum. Then you do the collision at the total given energy, E, and at this energy, you have all those kind of quasi-discrete levels which will contribute to the process. So you just have to calculate the probability for the 3-body combination of that quasi-discrete level down to here, this one, and everything. All those who are allowed by the energy that you are the total energy here, and you sum all of them, and you will have at the end some 3-body rate or 3-body cross-section, 3-body transition probability, 3-body combination probability by using this numerical trick of this discretization, just like if you would have discrete states here. And so when you do that, it's very common, I would say, in this kind of collision study to do this. And so this is what I was telling you. Then to create a given state here, then you just have to sum over all the box states, the probability over all the box states. And so this is what we do. And so, of course, it should not depend on the size of the box. So here, typically, this is the probability that you calculate from. Once you have discretized your continuum, you do a scattering cross-section, that is scattering calculation, that is that you solve your Schrödinger equation, your kind of coupled equations. You get the S matrix, you will have the probability here, you sum this probability, and here it is this probability which is given, which is here the probe that it does not depend on the size of the box. And so you do all kind of numerical tests like this, and so at the end, so we go to the end, finally. So the nice thing is that by treating those, by discretizing this continuum, the nice thing is that you can actually look to all the three processes that I was telling at the beginning, these three equations, which is that not only the three-body combination, in the same calculation you have everything. The three-body combination, this quenching to the other vibrational level, that is the collision of an atom with the molecular ion going to another vibrational level, and the reverse process, which is the three-body breakup, all in a single calculation here. And you can compare the rates in this particular case, and so you can see what is the most probable. And just in passing here, the rate for this three-body combination looks really small here. And so we have to double check those numbers because there are also some issues regarding some numerical factor which could get up to 100 in numerical value. So it means that here we can probably keep some 100 factors, so it's not that clear. But just to say that at the end we get some kind of answer from this, I would say, reasonably simple model, an intuitive model in the sense that you keep all along the identity of the particle. And hopefully, of course, the idea would be to apply this kind of procedure to any kind of three-body process that are expected in these ion traps, hybrid traps, that is ion atoms, that are expected to occur at some point in the future. So I think I'm finished, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olivier. And maybe we have time for one or two short questions.
The physics you were describing of formation of these weakly bound molecules seems pretty universal because it's happening in this 1 over r to the 4 potential.
Yes.
Right? So, but then it seems like, or is it true that then the species dependent, the wavelength might be different because these upper levels, these dissociative levels, are lying differently. So one would have to find the right wavelength then for the right species.
To avoid them.
Right.
To avoid
the right wavelength or to find the right wavelength.
Yeah. I mean, to protect them. Actually, this is the idea. If you have a heavy system, I would say that there is no way. I mean, you will always find a channel which will dissociate your molecular ion. If you work with light system, there may be some places, because the density of level is lower, and so it could be that there are places or wavelengths where the molecular ions are protected. So this is something to look at, I have to admit, so we have not looked yet in detail, but of course when you look at lithium barium plus or lithium italium plus, there could be places where you have need the protection of these molecular ions. So it could be lucky. But yes, that would be an idea.
What's the electron affinity of H3 minus?
The electron affinity of H3 minus, I mean, it's hard to say because H3 does not exist, right? So the binding energy, as I said, is like a little bit about 100 log number. The lowest bound state, this is what I was.
So 100 wave number is the electron affinity of
H3. Why is it?
So it's below the triple dissociation.
Yeah. So this is it. Actually, this is 70. You see the running. Yeah. So it's fragile. Yeah, but if you do that in cold trap, normally it should survive. So this is the idea. The thing is that, of course, with the kind of rates that I've shown, this is really at the limit of what could be observed in this kind of traps. So it's kind of not clear if it could be observable anyway. Yeah.
Is the Innsbruck group trying to use cold H2 and helium with the H minus?
No, actually they use only H2. I mean, they have helium as a buffer gas,
I see.
but the density of helium is much less.
And what about the H2? Is that cold?
Yes, it is. They managed to have a reasonably cold. I mean, it is.
It's sort of
it is
like
caged,
what's
right?
evaporating liquid hydrogen.
Yeah. So, but normally they have much more H2 than helium. So we have done helium just for the purpose of being able to do something, because H2 that start to be a bit complicated. Yeah, but it's kind of. I don't think that the rate will be significantly different. I mean, we know that from time to time you can model H2 as helium. I mean, as a structureless particle. So I don't think that in that respect it will change too much the three-body rate. Yeah.
Okay, then we can thank Olivier again.
Thank you very much.